This is Jerry Coleman, play-by-play voice of the Dothan High Wolves on 96.9 The Legend, and you're tuned into the Phillip Jordan podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Phillip Jordan podcast. I am your host, Phillip Jordan, from Last Word on College Football, where I cover the Auburn Tigers, and the in-studio host and producer of Dothan Wolves Football on 96.9 The Legend. We've got a fun show planned for you guys today on this Thursday. We are going to be discussing, looking ahead, SEC Week 8. Of course, we got the big Alabama-Tennessee matchup, and also we'll be looking at the Georgia-Texas matchup as well. Two epic games in the SEC in Week 8. You can check out the Phillip Jordan podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. If you're on Apple Podcasts, please follow, rate, and review. Leave a review, and I will read it on a future edition of the show. And if you leave just 4 stars, you're just a straight-up hater. You can also check out the show over at Wiregrass Daily News. You can watch the show over at the Phillip Jordan Sports YouTube channel. You can email me at sportstalkphilipjordan@gmail.com. Now let's jump into it with today's featured guest. Right, as I said off the top, we are looking ahead, previewing SEC Week 8. Joining me to do that is Adam Spencer. Check him out over Saturday Down South. Newsletter editor, writer, columnist, DFS expert. Different, a lot of titles this man has, but he knows his college football. And Adam, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Did I nail all the things you do?
Who even knows? I don't know. There's so much going on, especially during the season.
Absolutely. I lose track of all the different stuff I try to do. I sometimes forget that in my day job I'm an optician. I forget to tell people that. So, anyways, it's a fun time of year, and it's been I don't want to use the word there's parity in the SEC, but I feel like the SEC has a lot more depth this year. Just, we're going into Week 8. Of course, we got the two massive matchups, Alabama, Tennessee, and then Georgia, Texas. But the conference as a whole has just been really competitive this year.
Yeah, and I think, you can, when you're doing any sort of rankings, you can put Mississippi State down there at 16. You can put Texas in at 1. And then, it's not like 2 through 15 is a free-for-all, but there are like some tiers. You can put, there's like 2 through 8 and then 9 through 15. Like you could pretty much put in like any order you want and be pretty safe on those. So there's a pretty good tier of like top teams that are, beating up on each other, and then some of these South Carolinas and Kentucky's on the right weekend. Vanderbilt now is all of a sudden a powerhouse, it seems like. So any of these teams, you catch them on the wrong week, it's tough. And I mean, I think Kirby Smart's been saying since they beat Kentucky in Lexington by like whatever that final score was, it was really close, but they were saying Kirby Smart's been saying winning on the road in this league is hard. And he said that over and over again. And, Alabama clearly didn't get that message when they were going to Vanderbilt. I mean, South Carolina should have won at Alabama, but it's tough to win on the road in this league. I agree with Kirby Smart there. And I think we're seeing it, that's the parity, is that any team can like defend its home turf.
Yeah, no, you put up on X your power rankings for the conference. You got Mississippi State down the bottom, and I think most people say, yeah, Mississippi State's probably the worst team. But Georgia just found out, like, I don't think Georgia was really need ever fear or worry to lose Mississippi State, but still they threw over 300 yards and scored 31 points almost. That just kind of gives you an example there.
And I think it's tough in this day and age too to really keep just any young people focused on any sort of task ever. I mean, that maybe makes me sound like an old man, but it just seems like more and more like these teams are just buying their hype, and they're just taking their foot off the gas pedal. And if it just doesn't seem like we're getting the performances where an Alabama team would win like 60-0 against an inferior opponent. It doesn't seem like we're getting that sort of level of focus and intensity. I don't know if bringing money into the mix for the players has changed that aspect of it. There's any number of reasons. It just seems like we're seeing less and less, teams being able to blow out opponents and like finish a blowout. That's the tough part. I mean, and some of that too might just be trying to get some guys work. I mean, I know that Mizzou has lost a couple of, potential blowouts and left some points on the board this year just because they were up big and just didn't want to keep going. And I think it's hurt them in recent weeks when it comes to how off their passing game has looked. So it's an interesting balance between trying to build depth on your team versus trying to let your starters really keep going and finish what they started with a blowout. So there's a lot at play here, and it's going to be interesting to see how it continues to play out.
Yeah, one more note on your power rankings. Of course, I think most people are going to have Texas and Georgia 1 and 2, the two playing this Saturday night. You got LSU at 3 over A&M, Alabama, Tennessee, all those other teams. What is it about LSU that you've liked that have them on that 3 spot?
It's the offense. Like it's when you look at these teams and they're all flawed, it's like, okay, well, what unit do we like? I like the LSU offense better than the Texas A&M defense, but it's close. Texas A&M's defense has shown that it's pretty good, but I'll give the LSU offense the slight edge there. Whereas I think that the Texas A&M offense has a few flaws. I think the LSU defense has several flaws. So these are not perfect teams. Even Texas, like you look at Texas's defense, like, yeah, they're good statistically, but who have they really played up to this point? Like it's not much of anything. Georgia, even though their offense is flawed, is going to be by far the best offense that Texas has faced this year. So it's going to be interesting to see that. But yeah, when it comes down to like LSU, like I love Garrett Nussmeier. I think he's going to be in Heisman contention by the end of this year or next year if he stays, and he might not stay. He might go pro depending on how he tests and stuff. But yeah, I just think that LSU's offense, Kyron Lacey, I mean, where do they find these receivers? It just seems like every year they have a quarterback and a receiver or two that's just in contention for to be an NFL star the next year. And I think their tight end Mason Taylor is going to be a great NFL player too. So, I just like the talent that LSU has on that side of the ball, and they keep winning these close games, and that's a talent too. Like being able to win a close game, the opposite of that is South Carolina. Like they just can't close anything out. They're in all these games, they just can't close it out. LSU's found ways to close it out, and that's worth rewarding in the power rankings.
Especially when they got the voodoo going there at Baton Rouge. Yeah. I mean, that's that's another element that you've got to play against you there. I wonder if Nussmeier has heard the pleas from Greg McElroy to run the ball more. We heard that time and time again during the Ole Miss game. It almost became, I wasn't laughing at Greg McElroy, just kind of funny at that point, because you're right, because he does have opportunities to take off and run, but he's just that guy. He wants to stay in the pocket.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, when you put up 400 yards, in a game in the passing game, I mean, it's more efficient than running the ball. But yeah, when you have some of these wide open lanes, take off and get what you can. But until he stops making so many big plays with his arm, I'll go with what he's doing right now because it's plenty good.
Yeah, I kind of want to see the LSU playbook. I want to see if there's like plays for like 5 or 10 yard passes. Because Saturday night it was like, okay, if we're throwing it, it's going to be down the field, which it worked, like you said. They won the game and put up the numbers, but it was just one of the things like, do you have a screen pass to throw? But it was a good performance by them. Before we jump into the big matchups, I do want to quick get your thoughts. The SEC Big Ten potential scheduling partnership. Obviously, this is a big revenue thing too. A lot of money will be made, these two doing this. SEC, one would have to go to 9 or go to 8. I would hope the SEC goes to a 9 game conference schedule, but it just seems like this is just where the sport is headed. The SEC Big Ten just kind of like another piece of evidence that these two are at the top, and you kind of wonder down the road, is it just going to be the SEC and the Big Ten?
Yeah, and it might be. I mean, if these teams want to do that, they have the money and the power and the TV contracts to do just that, and it's going to be unfortunate for the other programs that get left behind, but they can't worry about that. That's not their problem necessarily. And I mean, there still would be ways, these buy games where they have pay a lot of money for FCS schools to come in, and they can still do those. Just make those the spring games. Like that's been a thing that's been batted around. I'm not the first one to come up with that idea, but that's an idea that's been batted around. Make your spring game against an FCS school and pay them their money. That's fine. You get a little bit better competition that way. Anyway, you can, because at the end of spring ball, like, your guys are just tired of going up against each other. So you're going to get more competition from an actual scrimmage against someone else. So yeah, I just think that that's the way to go. And then, yeah, I mean, when you have the brands that the SEC and the Big Ten have, like, there's no reason to play anybody else in the regular season. You'll get more eyes on an Alabama-Illinois game or a Northwestern Mizzou game or something. Like, those games are going to be just, those games are going to be watched because of the implications and the broadcast partners and all that stuff. So, I think that if they did do that, I do think that there would be a path to even further expansion. Maybe the SEC gets up to 20 or something and brings in Clemson and Florida State and Miami or whoever else, and the Big Ten brings in a couple of the other ACC programs, maybe, a couple of the Big 12 programs that are sort of towards the top there. But yeah, I mean, they're close. And I think if you get to 2 20-team leagues, I do think that you can pretty much have everything covered that you would want revenue-wise. And then sorry to everybody else, but you're out.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because you look outside 2 conferences, the brands that you kind of think of in the ACC, like you brought up, Clemson, Florida State, Miami, then you have Notre Dame sitting out there still independent. And right now, Colorado's sitting out there, but they're a brand because of Dion, not really because it's Colorado. And no offense to any of the other Big 12 schools, but they really don't have that cachet of the name brand. So you're right, when you really look at it, outside of maybe those 4 or 5 schools, all the brands are in these 2 conferences.
Yeah, and I think that then you maybe have a conference that springs up just around basketball. You could have like a Gonzaga, you could have a Kansas in a conference. You could, if Virginia doesn't get taken for whatever reason in the realignment, Virginia could be in there. There's a chance to build a heck of a basketball conference from teams that get left out. Arizona might be one of those schools. The future of college sports is going to be, I think, radically different than it is now. And that's just the way that it's trending. I think that the SEC and Big Ten have, really, there was these rumblings and sniffs of private equity getting involved. And when you're sitting on a pile of money like the SEC and Big Ten, you don't want to give any of that up. So that should spur them into action before, these billionaires get in here and ruin everything.
Yeah, that's the thing about all these people, that would remiss the way college sports or college football was. I'm like, well, get ready, because it's going to even change even more in the years ahead. Let's look at these games. Alabama at Tennessee was what I want to start with. 2:30 Central Time, ABC. Alabama's favored going this one. I keep saying I still remember what happened last time Alabama went to Tennessee. Well, the state, I guess, Adam, now if a team from the state of Tennessee beats Alabama in that state, I guess it's just required you rip your goalpost down and throw it in the river. I mean, I guess that's just part of the deal now with that. But with this game, and Alabama's had their issues the last 2 weeks. Really, when you look at it, the last 10 quarters, since the second half against Georgia, Alabama's been having issues defensively. I mean, you can see it. And I with this team, I look at a team that's not disciplined. And I said it in the show earlier this week. I hate being this guy saying this. You can tell that Nick Saban is no longer on the sideline. That's just evident when you way this team carries himself now. No shot at the board, but that's how I see it. But Tennessee's had their issues too the last 2 weeks, only scoring being down 3-0 at halftime against Arkansas and Florida. Just what sticks out with this matchup for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on how Alabama is able to stop James Pierce on the edge for Tennessee, because they did not show any competence in stopping South Carolina's pass rush last week. Like, that was terrible. There was one play, even the announcer was saying, like, well, they're going to come from the edge here. If you're Jalen Milroe, you got to get the ball out of your hand quickly. And just, they didn't even block. The left tackle went and blocked the double team, the guy rushing inside, and just let, I think it was Kennard, just free rush at Jalen Milroe, who then double pumped. And it's just like, you can't do that. And so it just situational awareness was very lacking in that game. And that's been a big problem. But I think that you could sort of see the cracks in that even last year under Saban. I just think that, a lot of the turnover in the staff that he'd had in recent years, and, just the guys that he brought up with him, the Steve Sarkisians and the Kirby Smarts and the Lane Kiffin's. Well, they're off running their own great programs now, and he just hadn't found those next coordinators. I think if he had a couple of great coordinators last year, I think maybe he's not retired, but he
Yeah.
just, he got out at the right time, and a lot of these guys stay too long. I mean, it's sad to say, but look at Mac Brown at North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think he's probably stayed around a couple years too long at this point. And Saban got out when he could. I just think that this team just doesn't have situational awareness. Now that can, if they learn from South Carolina, then they'll beat Tennessee. But we'll know it in the first quarter if they've kind of learned from their mistakes against that pass rush, and we'll see. But that's going to be the key to the game, is stopping James Pierce from causing as much havoc in the backfield as South Carolina did.
You look at when Tennessee's on offense, and look, I know he's a freshman, but we know we've heard so much going into how great Nico could be. He's been solid, but we hadn't seen like that real breakout game from him, against a good opponent. I mean, they put up some big numbers against teams they should have, but their run game with Dylan Sampson there, I mean, the best rushing attack in the SEC, best running back in the conference right now. And then you look at Alabama. I mean, they can control it because, like I said, Alabama's offense is explosive. When you look at when Tennessee's offense is on the field versus this Alabama defense, where I think up front seven is really good, but I think we have seen kind of that secondary be exposed. A very inexperienced group, lost a lot of players from last year's team. How are you seeing that part of the matchup?
I would honestly put even more stress on the back end because, the secondary struggled, but so has Nico in some of these games. So, I would load the box with 8 guys to try to stop Dylan Sampson. If you stop Dylan Sampson, even if Nico does hit a couple big plays, that's fine. Stop Dylan Sampson. He scored all 3 touchdowns against Florida. You take one of those away, and the Gators maybe win that game. So I mean, and they left a lot of points on the board in that game too. Like Florida did too. So it was kind of a battle of attrition there. But yeah, if you stop Dylan Sampson, do that, because also like Nico's working with a pretty banged up receiving core too. Like this isn't all on Nico. Some of the guys aren't getting open. They're on, a couple of backups, and they get guys banged up and going out every single week, it seems like. So yeah, I think that there's a lot at play in the Tennessee passing game that's not ideal right now. So load up the box, 8 in the box every down early, send a 9th guy even sometimes. And if you get burned by it a couple times, then back off a little bit. But you got to stop Dylan Sampson, and that's cut off the head of the snake, and maybe you stand a chance to win.
Looking at Georgia and Texas, I've been super excited. Just a quarterback matchup in this. Quinn Ewers or Arch, who knows? We'll see what happens. Maybe, if Arch gets in there or not, but he won't. But, unless Quinn Ewers gets hurt. But also you've got Carson Beck on the other side of it. But you mentioned it earlier, the Georgia offense is the best one as Texas defense has seen. I mean, and Texas has 2 high-profile wins, Michigan and Oklahoma. Those 2 offenses were not good. Michael Hawkins, I mean, did he have anybody to throw? There was never a point in that game Saturday where I felt like their offense was a threat. And we've seen what Michigan's offense has been this year. What challenges do you see this Georgia offense being able to give the Texas defense, outside of the elite quarterback play, obviously, that other teams have not been able to do against Texas?
Yeah, I think that Arian Smith's going to be a big part of this game. Just the deep threat that they haven't really had, and a quarterback that can actually hit a deep pass. I just think that, Oklahoma was doomed from when it walked into that stadium because, what was it? Like their top 5 receivers were out. Like that's insane. That's an insane amount of your top receivers to be out. Like how does that even happen? So they were doomed from the start there. I just, but yeah, Dominic Lovett is going to be a key to this game. I think getting ETN active in the passing game too is going to be important for Georgia, just as a check down guy and a guy who, get the ball in space too. And let's see if these Texas defenders can rally, because they haven't played anybody like this. And like, that's even saying like Georgia's offense hasn't been great this year by any means. Like they've had a couple of good games. They should have probably put up 50 on Mississippi State though. So they've left some points on the board and they've looked vulnerable at times, but they're still the biggest test just because of some of this talent that they have all across the ball. And Carson Beck's going to be a first round pick. I mean, he just is. Like that's what it's going to be. He's got the build, he's got the arm strength. Some of the decision making we've seen NFL teams don't really care that much about, with some guys that they take in the first round. So, I think he's a first round quarterback, and we'll see if he can carve up some space in that Texas defense.
Yeah, the Texas defense is ranked number 1 of all the SEC teams, but like we mentioned, they have not really been tested from an offense. When you flip it around, the Texas offense versus the Georgia defense, of course, Quinn Ewers was back. Looked a little shaky to start, but I think that's kind of expected coming back after he'd been out for as long as he was with injury. But and their running game is done really well. And then you look at the Georgia defense. Of course, we saw what Alabama did against them. I mean, they couldn't stop Alabama in the first half. And I'll just be honest, of course, I cover Auburn last for college football, so I watched the Auburn. Auburn moved the ball on Georgia. They just couldn't finish drives, which has been an issue of theirs all year long. And then last week, Mississippi State, Michael Van Buren threw over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns against them. Going into this matchup, you're kind of just looking at that, the Texas offense versus the Georgia defense. It's kind of got to be concerning right now if you're Georgia, just kind of how your defense has played. And now you got Quinn Ewers, another future NFL quarterback coming in.
Yeah, I think that we'll have to see if Michael Williams can play in the middle of that defense, because when Georgia has had its dominant defenses, they've had, Jalen Carter in the middle. They've had a Jordan Davis in the middle. They've had their defense relies a lot on having a big defensive tackle just eating up space in the middle of that offensive line. So they haven't had that this year. And I think that if Michael Williams is still out this week, then, Wisner and Jaden Blue are going to have big games on the ground. And when you have big games on the ground like that, your linebackers have to stay close to the line of scrimmage, and you're in bad positions for the passing game. Now, another guy, Isaiah Bond, I don't know if there's been an update this week, but he left last week with an injury too. He was, arguably Texas's top receiver. So, that side of the ball, it's going to be, which team is able to overcome some key injuries. You were right that Ewers came out looking sluggish in that first quarter. I think that they put up 0 points in the first quarter against Oklahoma before turning it on a bit. So yeah, who can overcome the injuries? Who can look sharper, especially early? The first quarter is going to be super important in this one, especially for Georgia. Just trying anything at all to get the crowd out of it, because that's going to be a tough atmosphere. It's one of the best in college football. So it's just going to be overcoming injuries and trying to get the crowd out of it for Georgia.
Yeah, and of course, we're in the 12-team playoff era. So, I mean, yes, Georgia could lose this game, still get in, but you still got to think they don't want to, in another heavyweight game, a loss. So, I mean, you got to think Georgia's really going to come out and try to, show everybody who they are, and that, they've come back from the Alabama game, and just kind of show everybody why they are a title contender too in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a statement game. And, because Georgia, everybody's kind of down on them, and, it's like, oh, we lost by, 1 score to Alabama, like in Tuscaloosa. So why is everybody so down on them? It's because they haven't played up to their potential. But, based on what we've seen, like I said, it's tough to win in the SEC. We've seen Alabama drop a tough game. Georgia's at least lost to a ranked opponent. It was a top 5 matchup in that game. So, I think that, the same thing with Ohio State. Like if you look at Georgia and Ohio State, they have pretty similar profiles right now. Losses on the road to top 5 teams by 1 score. So, I think it's all this hand-wringing and panic about Georgia is a little premature. But yeah, they've shown some flaws, but it's a statement game, and I think Kirby Smart's going to have them ready to roll. This isn't their first rodeo in a tough road environment, even this year, because we just talked about Alabama, and they showed a lot of fight coming back from that awful start. So it's going to be an exciting game. And I think it while it might not be as dramatic as the Alabama game, I think it could be another really, really good football game.
And then another game, perhaps, especially if Georgia wins, we could see again later on down the road in the SEC championship game. I'm not going to go through all the games for this weekend, but any other games that really got your attention in the SEC this Saturday?
Well, we should talk about the game between Auburn and my Missouri Tigers, because I think that that's huge for Mizzou. The line's it opened at like 7 in favor of Mizzou or something, and it's already down to 4.5. So, there's a lot of action on the Auburn side, and I get it. Like Mizzou has not looked great this year. They just got boat raced by Texas A&M. So I get it. Brady Cook can't hit a downfield pass to save his life this year after connecting on almost all of them last year. So that's a big game for Mizzou. I mean, Hugh Freeze has already taken a couple shots at Missouri and Kentucky, Vanderbilt, and it's just so you got to come out and set the tone and really make a statement and say like, hey guys, like yeah, we got beaten by Texas A&M, but that's a playoff contender and we're a playoff contender too. So I'm going to be looking for that, see some explosive plays from the offense, but I'll have my eye on that game, of course. And I probably would, even if it wasn't my alma mater.
Well, obviously I will, because again, that's the team I write about. And Auburn is the best 2-4 team I've ever seen. If you take the turnovers away, they're probably a much better. I've said if you cut the turnovers in half that they've had this year, they're probably sitting at 5-1. They probably still beat Arkansas, Cal, and they should have beat Oklahoma. I mean, they outplayed Oklahoma from start. So it's kind of like you look at that Auburn. They're not your typical 2-4 team coming in, because if they just don't beat themselves, this should be a good game.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to be the key is the Tigers have to force, or Missouri's Tigers have to force a couple of turnovers. And if you get into, Peyton Thorne's head early, then, that just kind of builds on itself. So, yeah, you got to force a turnover in the first half. Don't let them get any sort of comfort level going and go from there. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a key for the Missouri defense.
Yeah, that's true with Peyton Thorne. He can be good at times, but it's like as soon as he makes a mistake or just something doesn't go right, he does get in his head and he's just like shot from that point. So that should be a good one to start us off at 11 o'clock Central Time on Saturday. A lot of good games on Saturday. And this was a lot of fun, Adam, having you on. First time us chatting this season about SEC football. But listener, viewers want to check you out online. Where can they find you?
Yeah, just come on over to SaturdayDownSouth.com. We'll have everything covered every weekend. And, Saturday.football, you can subscribe to our newsletter that comes out twice a week.
All right, everybody, go check it out. Go check out Adam's work. Go check out Saturday Down South, of course. And Adam, I appreciate the time, and I look forward to when we can do this again sometime down the road.
Yeah, sounds good.
It's high school football season, and that means the Dothan Wolves are back on 96.9 The Legend. Every Thursday night, check out the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show with Jerry Coleman and Ken Lambert as they sit down with Dothan Wolves head coach Jed Kennedy about the previous game and preview the upcoming opponent. If you missed the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show, you can check out the podcast at wiregrassdailynews.com or go to your favorite podcast catcher and just type in Dothan High School Football. And, of course, every Friday night, pregame starts at 6:45 and kickoff is at 7 for all the Dothan Wolves football action. All right. Once again, thanks to Adam Spencer for coming on the show. Real quickly, drop my picks for the weekend in the SEC. Alabama, Tennessee. I like Alabama in this game. Look, Alabama's had some issues, but as Adam said, if they figure out the issues they had against South Carolina, correct those, situation awareness, you heard him say it. Greg McElroy has said his podcast, radio show, all that stuff, ESPN broadcaster. So I think Alabama just better. And I don't think Nico has not shown to really be able to stress things down the field. Alabama has a good front seven. Limit the Tennessee run game will be important. I like Alabama in this game because 2 years ago when these two matched up and Alabama lost in Knoxville, we also got to remember Hendon Hooker was the quarterback for Tennessee then, and Tennessee was just slinging the ball all over the field. The receivers are injured. I think it's a close, competitive game. I'm sure Alabama's going to make some mistakes here. I like Alabama to win a close game. Georgia, Texas, these are two very close teams. I know there's issues. The Georgia offense has not been consistent. I know defensively there's some question there with this team. This is not an awesome Georgia team as we've been used to seeing in the past years under Kirby Smart. But I know Georgia knows this is a statement game. They have got to have this one. I mean, Texas wants it to say, hey, we're here. We're in the SEC. We are the SEC top dog. This thing is going to come down to the wire. You got two future NFL quarterbacks in this one, maybe three, Arch down the road. I like Georgia. I feel like Georgia is going to have the ball last. I feel it's going to come down to who has the ball last. Georgia has the ball last. Carson Beck leads the Bulldogs to a game-winning drive. I like Georgia to take this one. But I think Quinn Ewers has an opportunity to put up some yards. We've seen some teams be able to do that and move the ball on the Georgia defense. Looking around the rest of the SEC, we mentioned a little bit there, Auburn and Missouri. By the time you're listening to this, my preview should be up for this game over Last Word on College Football. Missouri is a 4.5-point favorite, 11 a.m. ESPN. Missouri should win this game, but I'm not actually not going to pick it. I know it's a cop out. I go back and forth. I can see Auburn winning this game. I can see Auburn going into Missouri, winning this game if they don't turn the ball over, but we haven't really witnessed that so far with Auburn. I think it's a winnable game for Auburn. Missouri should win the game, though, but it should come down to the wire. South Carolina at Oklahoma. South Carolina's 3-3. Oklahoma's 4-2 on the year. 11:45 Central Time, the SEC Network. Oklahoma's a 3-point favorite in this one. I'm actually going to go with the underdog. I think South Carolina wins this. Oklahoma just doesn't have much offense. Defensively, they're really good. They're going to have to cause a lot of turnovers. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I don't see a lot of points because then you got South Carolina's front as well. They'll be getting after Hawkins. I like South Carolina to win a close. I think South Carolina just has a little bit more weapons offensively than Oklahoma. But Oklahoma's defense is better than South Carolina's. But unless there's a whole bunch of turnovers by the Gamecocks, I think South Carolina can win this one. A&M at 5-1, they will be at Mississippi State. They should blow this one out. Mississippi State, we'll see what they can do offensively. They put up a lot of yards there against Georgia. I'm just going to go A&M. I think A&M should cruise on this one. LSU at Arkansas. This is a trap game, I think, for LSU. They've got A&M coming up. They just beat Ole Miss in a very emotional, intense football game. I am going to go with LSU to win this one. This one's going to be close. They're only 2.5-point favorite. Going to Fayetteville. Arkansas has done some good things on defense, the way they play there. Travis Williams is doing a great job as their DC. And also, when you look at with LSU, with Arkansas, Taylor Green has played well there also. And then Kentucky at Florida. No Graham Mertz rest of the year. His year is done. G.J. Lagway will be the quarterback here. This Kentucky defense is nasty. It is in Gainesville. I'm going to go Kentucky defense. Again, I don't see a lot of points being scored here. That's 6:45 on the SEC Network. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Phillip Jordan Podcast. Again, thanks to Adam Spencer from Saturday Down South for coming on the show. We will be back next week. We're going to have an SEC basketball episode on the podcast next week, so stay tuned for that. Media Days is going on this week. Blake Lovell from the Southeastern 16 is going to join me, and we'll break it all down. Of course, next week on the podcast, we will recap all this that happened in the SEC. Who won between Georgia and Texas? Who won between Alabama and Tennessee? We'll break it all down as well. And, of course, you have the Wiregrass High School Football Report on Monday. Thursday night, the Jed Kennedy Coaches Show on 96.9 The Legend. And the Dothan Wolves will play Smith Station on 96.9 as well on Friday night. The pregame starting 6:45. Kickoff is at 7. Check out the podcast, please. Subscribe. Favorite podcast platform. Go find it. It's also at Wiregrass Daily News. YouTube at Phillip Jordan Sports. And also, you can email me at sports.philipjordan@gmail.com and check out all my written work over at Last Word on College Football. Everybody has a great weekend. Enjoy the football. Till next time. Bye-bye.